that state, which takes over the person's lives and takes over the lives of the people around them, is overwhelming, like a tidal wave that crashes in on a family's life.
These voices are witches, and they're hurting me from a long time ago.
Be frightened or be a little nervous.
Feeling sorry for yourself, and you're punishing yourself.
I don't know what it happened.
I've tried, many times to make it on my own. I've lived alone in a hotel, and I used to get very lonely and uptight.
After that, I don't know what it happened. And my brain was going to burn that time.
I felt that I should be under medication.
Sickness, when you feel like hurting yourself. And it's part of being guilty of things that you've done, and it's hard to deal with sometimes.
They would give me injections of thiazine, and that would quiet me down. That would quiet me down and keep me from acting so chastised.
Of all disease, mental illness provides the most challenging test of our humanity. All over the world, the medical profession, confident in the power of new drugs to relieve symptoms, have sent thousands of those called most mad out of the asylums and into the community. People suffering from the disordered state of schizophrenia, about half of all mental patients, need special care if they're to survive out on the street.
I've been hearing voices since I was 9. And my fear of telling my parents is that I will get put away in the hospital. So I would not tell them. They would hear me talking to the voices. They would ask me, who was you talking to? You better stop doing that or they think you crazy. A lot of time when I was drugging, the voice was telling me to hurt a lot of people. I was mostly scared to get high with people because of the voices.
Psychiatrist and anthropologist Arthur Kleinman has studied medical practice in both the developed and the less developed worlds. He's critical of the kind of psychiatry practiced in hospitals in the West.
Psychiatry is too biologically focused today, I think. That doesn't mean that mental illness doesn't have a biological base. We have a lot of indirect evidence to suggest that genetic and perhaps even environmental sources of biological change are important for mental illnesses. But psychiatry is so focused today on the biology that it leads to a number of myths that I think are mischievous and potentially dangerous in the future. One would be the magic bullet, the idea that coming up with a drug is going to remove mental illness, that a severe mental illness like schizophrenia is going to be cured with a magic bullet that will be found from biological research. And I think that's the wrong model. I want to see all the good biology there is for psychiatry and for understanding mental illness. But what's going to happen when we know more about the biology is that it's going to make the psychological and social aspects of mental illness much more, not less important.
Eye movements, I don't know what that means, but I said enough.
3 societies offer very different styles of care to their mentally ill. In the USA, as everywhere in the world, the new drugs have allowed psychiatric hospitals to be closed. The biological approach has landed many patients on the streets without support. But what holds true of American mental care does not necessarily hold in India. There, families provide most of the support for mental patients. And Italy has added a special humanity to mental care in the hospital and in the community. But for years, in Italy as elsewhere, the most disturbed patients were cut off from society altogether. An asylum was supposed to be a refuge, a place of safety. But in reality, the hospitals were there to protect the public.
Madness scares. So the psychiatric hospital was built with high walls to keep the madness in, so the society could be more calmed down or easy on it without seeing it.
Here also, scientific psychiatry was developed. Research and treatment were concentrated on the search for physical causes and cures. The relief of symptoms using chemicals and extreme forms of shock treatment dominated that search. Even major surgery was tried. Nothing seemed to work. The inmates could have little hope of release.
Si diceva una volta che dal carcere si esce, dal manicomio no. C'erano delle parole che parafrasavano Dante sulla porta dell'ingresso del manicomio, dove dicevano: lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate.
Today, a few patients remain inside, their characters permanently changed by that long institutional history.
Io il primo impatto che ho ricevuto venendo qui dentro mi ha dato l'impressione più di un carcere che di un ospedale, perché le strutture erano molto grandi, molto affollate e il trattamento purtroppo era un trattamento di custodia e allora eravamo costretti a fare un servizio di vigilanza soprattutto.
C'era delle parti, se entrava la mattina ce ne poteva essere 50, tutte a fila, tutti legati, tutto si scioglievano un po' dentro a quei bagni, si lavavano, ma male loro, noi. Anche il lavoro stesso era s'abbrutiva come persona, perché era un istinto di sopravvivenza, o le busco io o le buschi te. Cioè. Tutto chiuso, le camere, i bagni, ma addirittura gli infermieri la sera chiusi dentro le parti insieme a malati.
Venivano privati di tutto, dei suoi abiti, delle sue cose, degli effetti personali, se aveva un collane, orecchini, di tutto, perché purtroppo tutte le cose potevano fare una ricerca per arrivare al suicidio.
Then, in the 1950s, came the psychotropic drugs. For thousands, these really did reduce their symptoms.
I beg you, whatever you do to stay on the drugs.
Yeah.
And stay on them for the next 2 years.
Around the world, the mental hospitals began opening their doors, and the mass exodus began. But in psychiatry, as in most of medical practice, the researchers and clinicians remained in the institutions. Today, Columbia University Hospital, New York, is a temple of science for psychiatrists. In the schizophrenia research unit, the biological approach remains the dominant one.
Can you put your chin here, Nedra? Do you feel comfortable?
It is almost certain that schizophrenia is, at least in large part, a biological disorder and probably has a genetic component. So, for example, we know that there is very good evidence that in part schizophrenia is inherited. It may not be an inheritable disorder in all patients, but at least in some it is. We also know that there are real disorders in brain function and in brain structure in many patients with schizophrenia. We can now show in some patients with schizophrenia an actual decrease in the amount of brain tissue.
Right. That's about 20, I quantified it earlier, that's about 20-30%.
On the other hand, we have a tremendous tendency to neglect the social factors that are involved in schizophrenia. We provide very poorly for the life circumstances of patients with schizophrenia. Although medications are necessary in trying to help some of the symptoms, of course we have no medications that cure the illness, and the medications that we do have now are very toxic and cause many, many serious side effects.
On the unit, the control of symptoms provided by the latest drugs allows group therapy to replace the straitjackets of the past.
Maggie, I know you had joined us even though you're not feeling well today. Maybe you could talk to people about the way that you're suffering.
I've been very hopeful before, but I'm getting sick to my stomach now. I can't even face the day. I barely could make it here. I just want to hide. I want to sleep. I want to hold my head. I want to cry. I don't know what I want to... I don't know what I'm going to get out of being here. I mean, I really don't think I'm going to get very much. I think I'm going to be dead. I think I'm going to go out in a box. And I believe that, you know, the only thing that really hurts me, or what I'm here for, is supposedly the voices, you know, quote, they're coming from my head. But my big oomph to the TV world is I think it's a crock of shit. I think they're witches. I think they're using supernatural powers from far away to hurt me. They've heard about these powers, they've used them, and nobody knows how to stop them.
One thing that impresses me is that despite all the pain that you're going through and the problems that you've had, you've been able to come here in a pretty stressful situation and talk about the pain that you're having, talk about how you're feeling, and you know, you've come here for help and you're able to voice your problems with us. And I think that tells me that there's a lot more hope than you think.
What, you know, if I had someone to be with 24 hours a day, that would probably cure me. I mean, if I had somebody with me all the time without leaving me, I'm sure the voices would go away completely.
Maggie is one of our patients who is currently on the drug clozapine. She's had a good response. I think she's clearly better. She's much less tortured than she was with her psychotic symptoms. She feels better. She's more alert, much more verbal and talkative, and I think she'll do very well outside of the hospital. So I think clozapine has worked very nicely for her, but it hasn't been a miracle.
You know, as far as I can see, I'm not in too much trouble when I'm with you. But in other words, you know, the wilderness is certainly not for me. I've tried that too many times.
I think that probably
The best ally a patient has and a doctor has in helping somebody with schizophrenia is a good family. We're now very clear that parents don't cause schizophrenia, that we can help families deal with schizophrenia, both to help the patient and themselves.
Pressure of having the family.
It's an awful thing to have your son or daughter develop this kind of illness and to have to live with that. And these people need a great deal of compassion and support.
I agree with you what you said about the importance of medication and new treatments and our involvement as professionals, and yet I would say equally important was your involvement as a family that was able to adjust to and accept
The strain is particularly hard to bear for Maggie's sister.
The family problems is affecting my relationship with my husband, you know, because I come home sometimes very devastated, like when Marguerite had disappeared and was found. I talked to her after she was found at the police station.
If a patient with schizophrenia, no matter how good their medical treatment may be, is sent out of a hospital to be alone, they're never going to do as well as if they're sent out of the hospital with a family that's concerned, will look after them, will make sure that the doctors do what they're supposed to do. That's a tremendous plus.
But most discharged mental patients don't have families to care for them in the outside world.
My problem with the voices had got worse in this kind of setting because it's a lot of violence going on around the area. I got in a lot of fights, and I've seen a lot of my friends get killed, and a lot of them overdose.
What we see in the large cities is almost the absence of community. It looks like a vacuum, an emptiness, in which lonely, demoralized, alienated men and women roam around in predatory environments that lack humanness and engagement with their suffering.
The Columbia Research Unit will only take in those with families who can support them. So people like Dennis must seek help elsewhere. Just across the street from this elite research center is one place where Dennis went to try to escape the dangers of the street. A disused military arsenal called the Armory.
I went into the Armory in '89. I actually got tired of getting high. I needed to escape 3rd Street area. Everybody knew me. Drugs was easy to get. And eventually I would have died on the Bowery.
There are 800 beds. Very many of the homeless people who stay here have diagnosed mental disorders, and schizophrenia is common.
He's cool about it.
Alan Felix is the only psychiatrist in New York City working full-time with the homeless.
Yeah, well, maybe we can ask the man with the paper if they know.
This man here, let's ask him how he's doing. We're from the, you know the CSS program? Have you heard of it?
No.
Okay, we're a clinic right here in the shelter and provide a lot of different services, primarily psychiatric and social services. The shelter is a horrifying place. Very pathological behavior, criminal behavior at times, violent behavior, which goes on a fairly routine basis in the shelters, becomes part of the norm. There are violent street gang members that run the drug trade or may be involved in prostitution rings or in petty thefts. And in that sense, a lot of the shelter life mimics street life.
They will pick out the ones that they think is the weakest, and they will attack them. They will take their food and whatnot. I have one eye, and a lot of people will get over on me because I do have one eye and take my milk off my tray or take my food because I can't. They know which side to do it on because I was wearing a patch at that time.
It's tremendously stressful for patients who are already impaired. A schizophrenic patient may be paranoid because of his illness. And if he, on top of that, has to worry in reality about the person next to him trying to kill him or assault him or take away his possessions, and you can just imagine how that can exacerbate the illness.
Just had a nervous breakdown.
You had a nervous breakdown. Could you describe what happened to you?
Treatment with medication helps, but it's far from magic.
Men are very fearful of side effects, especially of being sedated. And they feel that they'll let their guard down. They won't be able to defend themselves. Now, that's a very realistic concern. The antipsychotic medications we have can cause considerable side effects. So the first challenge is, I think, to build up some trust, to work towards convincing the patient that they have something to gain by taking medication.
I get very happy, that I get very sad.
They don't ask for treatment, and they don't complain so much of hearing voices or of being depressed as much as they complain of not having a place to live or not having clothing or not having any money, and they want a job. So you actually were engaged to get married.
I can't get no satisfaction to the try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no.
Alan Felix is trying to help psychiatric patients readjust to the social world.
I'm trying to make some girl, and I'm doing this, and I'm deciding that.
Unlike Dr. Felix, the majority of psychiatrists are paid to remain in their hospitals, waiting for patients to be admitted or readmitted in crisis.
The practice of psychiatry as it relates to the chronically mentally ill still relies very, very heavily on hospitals. We talk about deinstitutionalization, and it really did happen. Lots of patients who were kept in the back wards of terrible hospitals were able to get out. But the whole idea behind that movement was that the community would provide resources, the necessary housing, jobs, support systems, supervision that would allow people who were somewhat impaired, but healthy enough to be out in the community to flourish in some way, or at least to get by. And the second part of the equation never happened. Patients were released to the streets, but they didn't get the kinds of supports that were shown to be needed in order to improve outcome.
Many people found themselves trapped in a vicious circle. Either emergency readmission into hospital or an unsupported life back on the streets.
I had my children, little tiny children. You know, after, when you have children. And I didn't even think I'd ever be back here. I didn't want to return, but the homeless situation now to the point is like, what the heck is going on? You know what's going on. It's like you see the skeletons of buildings, you see the skeletons of people. And it's a damn shame. Tu comprends? Oui. Capiche? Wow.
It's not psychiatry's role to respond alone to these problems, but it is psychiatry's role to advocate on behalf of patients for what is needed. That kind of integrated, comprehensive treatment system that we know from research can really make a difference. First-rate social support, the presence of resources that provide income supports, housing, sheltered workshops, supervision, halfway houses. Psychiatry should advocate for that.
Homelessness and poverty increase the suffering of the mentally ill in New York. But even in countries where many of the people face severe poverty, research suggests that different attitudes and ideas about mental illness may actually improve patients' chances of recovery. Benares, India, the holy Ganges. Traditionally, Hindu belief is that a pantheon of gods battles within us against a legion of devils and demons.
The experience of hallucinations and delusions in India is more likely to be organized by ideas about possession by a demon or some other supernatural entity.
हमारा खुद शादी कर लिया है जिन्नत। हमारा मालिक को साथ में सोने बैठने नहीं देता है। मैं साफ बता रहा हूँ। क्यों हमसे बकवासी कर रहे हैं?
A woman who believes a devil has taken her over. Her family has brought her to the holy Muslim village of Akbarpuri, hoping the devil can be exorcised. Her sister and her nephew accept her idea that she's possessed, as do the traditional healers.
हमको बाबा फायदा करे हैं। बाबा मेरा इज्जत मेरे बाबा के पास है। साला बहनों को नाता जोड़ा है मेरे सरकार से। जिन्नात मेरे को बहन बना दिया है।
Both the Muslim and Hindu supplicants who come here believe that the preachers, the imams who guard the shrines, have the power to drive out evil spirits.
Possession states probably occur in 90% of societies in the world, and were much more common in the Western world in the past than they are at present. Very common in the non-Western world. So it's a ubiquitous aspect of experience. And what is possession? It's an absorption into a trance-like state in which the experience of the trance, of the absorption, is of something entering the self or being in the self that's other than the self, someone else, a god or a ghost. Much of the time it's normal. When it's abnormal, however, it's recognized by others as being abnormal because the behavior associated with it goes beyond the limits expected.
But I'm not a mental philosopher and the mother also, but not using also, but not having all.
The imam believes that a devil has entered this man. His treatment is to eat pages of the Quran to drive the devil out. But in this culture, the idea that two identities can merge is not alien, as it is in Western psychology.
There's a very different sense of self, of the person, less bounded, multiple. Here's a more fluid idea of a self that can be permeable in some way, that can meditate and move and transform itself.
In India, a person's self is defined by the family. If anyone is admitted to the hospital here for any kind of illness, the family automatically comes too, to provide both food and support.
The family plays a central role frequently in the care of the patient, may make the decisions, may create a kind of a therapy management unit that takes over the decision-making from the patient. The family is not only a source of support, but is a source of stress, of tension, of difficulty. And therefore, that's also intensified in a society in which the patient is spending most or much of the time in the family setting.
Dr. Sharma knows that the treatments she prescribes can't work without the active help of the family.
This lady is suffering from schizophrenia of 1 year duration. There is a family history of the similar illness in her father as well. And it is nice that the husband and the mother of the patient have also come with the patient, and they also have expressed their keenness to cooperate in the treatment program. I am advising her drugs with the advice to continue these drugs for about 2 weeks, and then she can come for follow-up. आप ले आएंगे ना? हाँ, हमारे आदमी कहीं हैं कर ले आएंगे। हाँ, तो ठीक है, बहुत अच्छा, यही हम चाहते हैं। यही हमारा नर है। हाँ, तो हमारी राय से आप ओझा के इलाज में फेर में मत पड़िए, है ना? वो आप लोग क्योंकि उतना आप लोग पढ़े लिखे नहीं है, कम आप लोग का वो है, इसलिए उसका नाजायज फायदा उठाते हैं। समझ रहे ना बात को? आप डॉक्टरी इलाज कराइए। After the diagnosis is made, those patients who are very disturbed have to be admitted in the ward, and it is customary in all hospitals to see that at least 1 or 2 relatives stay with the patient during his stay in the hospital.
क्या कर सकते हैं, ऐसा क्या कहते हैं, क्या कर सकती हैं, जैसे
मैं डॉक्टर बन सकती हूँ, मैं प्रधानमंत्री बनूंगी, ये सब बातें
ये कुछ और भी कहते हैं, प्रधानमंत्री का मेरी वाकफियत है,
गाना वगैरह गाती है,
गाना गाती हैं। क्या हाल है माता जी इनका? प्रेम, बैठी रहो, बैठी रहो, बैठी रहो, बैठी रहो, बैठी रहो, बिस्तर पे बैठी रहो। क्या हाल है माता जी इनका?
I don't mean to romanticize. There certainly are many places in India where the mentally ill is stigmatized, or might be regarded as a witch, and treated poorly. But what's impressive is the presence of the family there with the sick person. The World Health Organization, in a comparison of schizophrenic patients in industrialized and non-industrialized societies, found that the course of schizophrenia over a number of years was easier, was better in the poorer societies and worse in the industrialized societies. Those findings show that you've got to take the social world into account, and that the course of illness is not just determined by the state of brain or by psychological response, but has a strong influence of the local setting, of the world in which people live, the workplace, the family, the community.
Siena, Italy. In the Catholic tradition, the experience of madness is again seen as a battle between the forces of good and evil. A madwoman, thought to be possessed, has her devil cast out by St. Catherine of Siena. In Italy, religion, medicine, and politics are intimately bound together. Just across the square from the cathedral stands the university and the 900-year-old hospital.
I think what impresses you when you go to a hospital in Italy is the fact that the community and the hospital are often more tightly linked. They've had a much longer history, of course, of interaction. And the hospital may be built more into the culture itself. That is a sign that illness and its treatment is part of the civic culture. It's part of the everyday world. We've walled it off more. We've put it into special institutions. We've built big barriers, much bigger barriers between the hospital world and the world outside.
Many former inmates of the old asylums are now free to live outside. In Siena, as in most of Italy, there's an open-door policy. A warmer, more positive and very Italian atmosphere prevails today, even inside the remaining hospitals.
Ma perché lo fa volentieri? Perché in fondo loro sono buoni. Tutto sommato il fatto che picchiano, che fanno, sono le persone più buone che esiste. Secondo me. Secondo me, poi può anche darsi un'altra cosa a dire di no, però io le dico che da loro grandi cose non ci si dicono, a parte il fatto se uno è in crisi, ma se no in genere sono buoni.
In Italy, the medical profession seems to accept that biological treatment by itself can't deal with mental illness. The drug trolley contains the same pills as in New York or Benares, but the style of delivery is very different. In the 1960s, a coalition of radical psychiatrists and politicians passed the famous Law 180. The plan was that all the mental hospitals would close. The reformers highlighted conditions in the old-style hospitals which were terrible.
Because the Italian reform comes as a reaction to a prison-like system of the old hospitals, this way of a human approach has become even more important than otherwise it would have been. It's about relating to the person who is a patient as a human being, first and foremost. It's also believing that the professional should allow herself or himself to be a human being. That having professional knowledge and expertise doesn't come instead of your ordinary human qualities, but complement it. And I think this is actually very characteristic of the Italian psychiatric reform and comes from the Italian culture.
Che escono, sì, sì, ma poi loro non è che magari ti considerano più come una famiglia, non come gli infermieri. Sì, che fa la puntura, fa la medicazione, ma questo gli importa meno, è più il rapporto che si ha così.
In Rome, some wards and some hospitals were closed in line with the reform. But many politicians and psychiatrists held on to their patients in units which even today are cut off from the wider community. At the hospital of Santa Maria della Pieta, many staff acted like possessive parents, refusing to let their children leave home. Dr. Bellucci shows an almost maternal intimacy towards her patients. She's worked in this ward for most of her professional life. They've all grown old together.
Giuliano, chi sei? Sei perplesso? Che c'hai? Mettiamoci seduti qua. Insieme, una sigaretta. Non ti senti tanto bene? Che c'è, mal di stomaco? Tutto. Questo è uno dei più pericolosi.
The mother in the Italian culture, la Madonna, Mother of Jesus Christ, is the model for each Italian mother who can sacrifice herself for her son or daughter.
Non vuoi sorridere? Ti si illuminano tanto gli occhi quando sorridi. Me non vuoi sorridere oggi, ti gira male, ti gira male, ti gira male. Questo amico mio non mi sorride oggi.
The psychiatric hospital was like a big mother that kept its patients in and didn't let them go out. When we started opening the doors to let people go out, the institution was afraid of losing them, like a mother that's very anxious when his little son starts walking.
Sono 22 anni che lo conosco, quest'amico mio.
Many hospital staff simply cannot believe that their worst patients could cope in the outside world. But in 1990, one group of diagnosed schizophrenics from Dr. Bellucci's ward went on holiday to the seaside town of Bracciano and never came back. Their defiant flight from the old-fashioned asylum, together with their art therapist and 2 nurses, hit the headlines. Today they live as a commune, and the town community has accepted them.
Facciamo la spesa, cuciniamo, abbiamo avuto marmellata la mattina. All'ospedale era buono il cibo, solo però per 500 persone non era tanto buono.
These men are still diagnosed schizophrenics. Somehow they've successfully adjusted to the outside world.
It's about trying to make sure that people can become a respected part of the community. So the emphasis is not on curing them for mental illness. It's about how to let them enjoy what there is to enjoy in everyday life in the community, to enable them to move from being disabled to being able.
Facciamo qui i compleanni, sono ricordati, ogni anno che cosa, facciamo la festa, ognuno quando è il compleanno di uno facciamo la festa che all'ospedale non succedeva.
Era la vita anormale.
E questi per voi, quanti anni in media
Eravamo
avete
uniti.
di ospedale?
E io ho 25-30 anni
Tu
dall'ospedale.
Roberto?
Io sono uscito 15 volte, sono 25 anni.
25 anni di manicomio. Francesco?
Quando io?
32?
32.
Che eravate arzilli poi? Forse uscire adesso...
Beh, se fossimo usciti 5 anni prima, 5 anni fa, gli entusiasmi sarebbero stati alle stelle.
Però penso che andare a vivere in una casa...
One of the leading reformers who welcomed the patient's dramatic escape was Professor Lazavio.
Ecco, io credo che per esempio non basta soltanto trovare una casa dove mettere delle persone fuori dall'ospedale psichiatrico, perché quella casa può ridiventare un piccolo manicomio. È importante che questa realtà sia realmente collocata nel paese, nel quartiere dove queste persone vivono, e che la comunità riconosca questa situazione non più come estranea, come aliena, ma una realtà che appartiene a quella comunità.
Today, local doctors check on the group and prescribe their essential medication. Without that, this experiment in community living would certainly have failed.
Caffè invece
Che mi ha messo?
ha messo l'acqua. E cosa c'è? Ha messo la terapia.
Il nostro ruolo è quello di far da tramite, quello di stabilire delle connessioni, di quello di far comprendere al normale che cos'è la follia, che cos'è la sofferenza, ma anche di far comprendere a chi soffre quali sono i problemi della normalità.
After the group had struggled on for a year by themselves, the medical and political leaders in Bracciano finally gave them official recognition, and even threw a party in their honor.
Di una presa d'atto che la riunione che questa sera si sta svolgendo nella nostra casa comunale è un avvenimento che veramente ci deve riempire di gioia, perché intanto ci dice che è un anno che una comunità sta facendo uno sforzo notevole in favore dei disabili mentali. Auguro tanto bene a questi nostri amici e alle famiglie. Grazie.
Però io penso che sia la risposta di Lorenzo a tanti altri, no? Ogni comunità terapeutica è un anti-elettroshock, no?
Un augurio nel procedere e nell'andare avanti dalla comunità terapeutica di Massimo di Marà, da Prima Valle. Auguri.
Madness is part of ordinary human experience, But there is another side to being a human being, and this is the ability to enjoy life, and the sense that every one of us has got something special, something positive about them in terms of abilities which other people can enjoy.
Perché poco che posso fare, sì, ma purtroppo non è più la gioventù che poteva lavorare molto di più.
Però quest'anno l'orto ci ha fornito di pomodori, di fagiolini.
Qualcosa.
Non ti sembra bello?
Con l'aiuto di tutti, però.
Ma con l'aiuto di tutti, però è stato carino questo
Sì.
Te Francesco, ti è passato questa angoscia del lago che avevi?
Non ho potuto spiegarmi che cosa era successo, però non l'ha fatto
Adesso
più.
ti ha fatto più. Allora ci vai più tranquillo.
Fuori c'è più pace, il lago fa tenere il carattere calmo, fa tenere il pacato. E mi piace. La confusione a me è piaciuta mai.
While in Italy, the medical profession has started to provide support outside the hospital, in New York City, it's been largely left to charities to try to create a few small communities for the mentally ill. Two Franciscan brothers, John Felice and John McVeigh.
I was assigned to a church in New York City by my superiors and told to develop some sort of an outreach program. That was because it was after Vatican II, and this was the church was opening its windows and its doors, as it were. I had no idea what kind of outreach program I was going to develop. I stumbled into this privately owned SRO-type hotel near our monastery, St. Francis, and it turns out that this building was filled with people that had been what we now call deinstitutionalized. These were people who had been stabilized on these new medications, and it was felt they could be released back to the community. Unfortunately, there frequently was no community. There was no family, no support system that would see that they would take the medications. Consequently, they would get sick again, go back in the hospital, be restabilized, back out, go off their medications, go back in the hospital. So what I stumbled upon back in the early 70s as a social problem was not homelessness, but was something called the revolving door syndrome.
Pure poison. This is acid, LSD.
The fact what we're creating was a surrogate family, a surrogate community for these folks that didn't have a community, to provide the services that would enable them to stay out of the hospital, help them take their medications, etc.
Hi, Sheila. How are you, dear?
Good. 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
What's this article going to be about, Freddie?
A wedding is a joy.
Right, and it's about your sister, and is it your stepsister?
She's my in-law.
Your in-law. It's about her wedding.
Well, not just about her, in general, weddings.
Proper care for schizophrenia takes skill, compassion, time, money, and patience, all in very short supply in New York City. While the disease strikes all classes, only a tiny minority can benefit from the help charities by themselves can provide.
The Puerto Rican Indians?
You're a Puerto Rican Indian.
This is something that is an equal opportunity disease, as I want to say. It affects anybody and everybody in our society. Consequently, we all are a little nervous about it because we don't know that it might not be around the corner of our life or the life of one of our loved ones. And I think that's the first reason why people in general get very nervous when they see like a really full-blown schizophrenic.
Well, that's what makes for life a mixture.
Break the camera, huh?
Continuing dilemma with Hilda about whether she can come back or not. Not because she's not psychiatrically clear.
I was in the U.S. Navy, you know, got honorable discharge, and I was worked for the post office and worked for the Veterans Administration. I went for computer school and was hired in computers, but I had 6 breakdowns on 6 different jobs, you know, and I got butchered, you know. I had an apartment at one time. It was nice. I could handle an apartment as far as an apartment goes. But, you know, what are you going to do? Sit in the apartment, you know? I don't watch TV. I can't read. My eyes aren't good now, you know. So, you know. So I can compare the 20 years here, you know, with the priest, so to speak, with the 20 years on my own, you know. And I'm not going to... I don't feel like hurrying to an apartment again, you know.
Tasty and delicious, yes. Watch this. Everybody smile in your head. Smile.
Fruit of the vine and work of human hands, it'll become for us our spiritual drink. Lord God, we ask you to receive us and to be pleased with the sacrifice we offer you with humble and contrite hearts. Lord, wash away my iniquity and cleanse me from my sins.
All the way up. Move right up and use both lines for talking.
When the supper was ended, he took the cup. Again, he gave you thanks and praise. He gave the cup to his disciples and said, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me."
Medicine is at heart a moral practice. And I think the message it has for us is that our sympathy, our empathy, our engagement with the pain of others is not just a measure of our humanity, but is maybe a sign of what is the future of our humanity. Because if we lose that sympathy, if we lose the engagement, if empathy plays no role in people in pain, in dealing with people in pain, then what kind of society are we in? What sort of world do we live with? What's the future likely to be?
Poi quando ci si è presentata l'occasione di vedere le cose belle, insomma, ci sentivamo un poco, non è che sono stupiti certe cose, però si devono risvegliare, insomma.
E che sono le cose belle di fuori?
Le cose belle di fuori, a me l'infermiere mi ha detto, dice, tu cerchi la pace, ma la pace lo sai quanta, dopo morto sai quanta ne trovi di pace.
E qui un po' di pace l'hai trovata?
E io qui un po' di pace l'ho trovata, certo ci sono dei momenti di malinconia, come ci sono dei momenti belli, insomma, che stai su de morale, insomma, sembra che le cose ti riescono più con facilità, c'hai un po' più di forza, il fisico, insomma, quei momenti reagisce meglio e gli entusiasmi sono proprio, insomma, alquanto soddisfacenti.
Each society is going to have to articulate, elaborate its own solutions to the problems of disordered states. Disordered states of mind, disordered states of the body, disordered states of social relationships, and schizophrenia in the disordered state of society. Like any chronic condition, you're going to have to treat the biology, the psychological response, and the response within a particular social setting. You can't divide the treatment of this problem.
Next week, the last in the series looks at the pioneering medical programs for treating AIDS and the management of HIV, including a harm reduction policy in Sydney. The Trouble with Medicine, next Thursday at 9:30, here on BBC Two.